one of the three key pillars for economic development. Housing, one of it is housing. There's also food security, and closely followed by that is education. So without housing, we really cannot have sustainable economic development. In approaching my speech today, I would approach it in 5 different topics. I'd shared this slide, so it would have been wonderful if the presentation was put up so the audience can follow. But if that's delaying, I'll just go ahead. Africa today is suffering from a huge deficit, housing deficit. The total shortfall is put at somewhere about 50 million. But the shocking thing there is that about half of that is Nigeria alone. And that's a big problem. So almost half of Africa's housing deficit is concentrated here. But the truth is, do we really have a housing deficit or we have a housing imbalance? Because of the rural-urban migration, there are a lot of houses that are empty, only that they are in the villages. So there's a dislocation when we use affordable housing. There's a lot of affordable housing. But what we're witnessing today, or generally around the world, is urban cities, the rural-urban migration, and it started decades ago, everyone coming to look for work. So while in essence, there really isn't a housing shortage per se, but there's an urban crisis because people still continue to come in to urban areas. And that really is what is causing the dislocation. And so even for policymakers, it's very, very important as we carve out some of these things. Because, and I'll use Nigeria and maybe Africa generally. We have our houses at home. They're empty almost close to 11 months in a year. But the cities are crowded. And that's what continues to put pressure. Lagos experiences, and today Abuja is experiencing it at a very rapid pace. So even as policymakers, when we want to allocate capital, capital really should be allocated wisely because there are certain problems in certain areas. Also, we have a huge youth population, and that is also affecting how we plan housing. Many youths want to run to the urban areas. What kind of houses we build, the kind of houses we need to build is actually to solve that future problem, which would happen very soon. It's estimated that even though the housing shortage in Africa today is 50 million, in the next 5 years, it's going to hit about 130 million. What that means is we cannot continue to manage this crisis in the old ways we've always done. Things have to change. And this is why finance is very important. Housing is really finance. We've seen instances where investors move money to different asset classes. It starts with money market investments, switches to equities, until we approach real estate as an investment asset class. The truth is government cannot do it alone. And if government does not create the right enabling environment to support this growth, then we'll continue to suffer huge dislocations in housing. Approaching housing from a finance point of view, we'll step back by looking at it, first of all, from an economic standpoint. Post-COVID, before COVID, we had some stability. I mean, countries like Ghana got affected largely because of COVID, where because economies, and this is a very important topic we should clearly understand, and it's part of what is going to cause this huge deficit and resolving it. Investors around the world flowed money. Money is like water. It flows to the area of least resistance. And so once COVID came, it significantly dislocated the world. Macros, and so governments around the world pumped a lot of money to try to solve this problem because it wasn't anything anyone was used to. And because of this, a lot of money started chasing few assets. In the last 5 years around the world, house prices have gone up at an abnormal pace. So it's not just happening in Nigeria, it's happening around the world. One of the consequences of this is almost 20 years of real estate appreciation has happened in the last 5 years. The part of that problem is for the next 15 years, you have a generation who today are in their 30s and 40s. They might rent much longer than their parents ever did because they cannot afford housing. So while even trying to solve this problem, and it's happening around the world, it's not a Nigerian problem, it's happening in every developed market. A number of these people would rent much longer. So how then do we solve, if we know that this is where economics is going to? Many of them are getting jobs, they want their first home, but house prices have gone up, rent is also running up. So how do we solve this problem? It's to ensure that we use a multi-pronged approach, similar to what the fiscal chairman, tax and fiscal policy chairman of the government had mentioned. It has to be a multi-pronged approach. We have, for example, today, multiple initiatives to a large extent that are not well coordinated. You have the Honorable Minister pursuing traditional initiatives like the Federal Mortgage Bank, like the Federal Housing Authority, but they are not able to generate enough because the total amount of money being generated as a country and being allocated to Ministry of Housing is not enough to take care of the demand that is growing abnormally faster. But this has to be resolved. And the only way, like we know, government's primary role is to create an enabling environment. Is how then can we take, the minister take a lead at this to work with other initiatives. The Renewed Hope Agenda, which is another very laudable initiative. We've seen it spread across multiple countries. My hope and wish is it stays mainly in the urban areas because that's where we're having, or we would have the crisis. So it's solving urban demand. However, you have initiatives like family home funds, reporting to the Minister of Finance, reporting to the CBN. I think a coordinated approach to having an agency. The US has an agency. They were very lucky because they had wonderful initiatives like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, so many mortgage institutions. US, as a result of the global financial crisis in 2008, promulgated a law that made one agency coordinate both the initiatives of the Ministry of Housing and the central bank, as well as the finance ministry. One single policy initiative to help bring everyone together. And today, it's working significantly. If not for that crisis, even the US was working at loggerheads. Everyone was running their various initiatives, and house prices went up significantly, and there was a global financial crisis. So I think for Nigeria here too, particularly, we should have initiatives where this is put together to ensure that we have one omnibus policy. That way, it's going to attract a lot of private sector money. The MREF, very smart initiative. It's working, but I think it's also not in line. How do you marry MREF, which is growing and being funded, directly with the initiatives that both FHA and Federal Mortgage Bank is producing, so that there's proper harmony and we're able to meet most of this urban dislocation? I think it's very important such initiatives are put in place. That way we work very closely with both the fiscal and monetary policies to ensure the right balance. One very simple initiative, which hopefully, Minister, and this is directed at you, if it works, is the CRR. Cash reserve ratio. What cash reserve ratio means is for every 1 naira you keep in a Nigerian bank today, 50 kobo of it stays with the central bank, just to ensure that there's not too much money in circulation. So banks earn nothing on that. It's seized by the central bank. This little initiative, if 5% of that money can be released through commercial banks for primarily for mortgage lending, just like Professor Ghana had said, it would have a ripple effect on creating jobs and helping us significantly close the gap. It is a very low-hanging fruit, I believe, because also the banks are not supposed to have those monies to do as they please. Government can direct how this money is. It's there. It is waiting. It is real. It's real money. However, there is single policy, it could significantly transform this country and also help our mortgage base. Nigerian banks today have less than 1% in mortgage. Banking everywhere in the world is mortgage. In the US, banks have roughly, their balance sheet is roughly about 40 to 50% in loans to real estate. In the UK, it's somewhere around 40%. In Nigeria today, it's 1%. So while the minister and all of us here try to work in isolation, we will do a lot of wonderful things, but you will not see the result because everyone has to come together. It's a holistic approach and not a fragmented approach to solving this. Just imagine debt increases by 1%, banks increase their funding by 5%. Remember, sir, I said banks are earning zero today on that money. So even at 10%, at 2%, at 5%, but directed to us, it's win-win for the banks and it's win-win for the economy. It's transformational, it's there, it's real, and it's a low-hanging fruit. Great. Another area, and I'm happy we have Mr. Akim Oguniran here because he pioneered some of the initiatives there, is REITs. Nigeria, and that's where organized institutional money comes into real estate. We don't have a REIT, regulation in Nigeria. It's one of the few countries that does not have REIT as a regulation. Luckily, Mr. Oguniran can be given this mandate, sir. I'm challenged because he's also a member of NREIT, which is very, very important in galvanizing institutional money. We need REITs because as we build the houses, remember, for you to create an ecosystem, those houses eventually need an ecosystem. You need supermarkets, you need commercial activities around housing. So building housing in isolation would not work. To create that ecosystem, it's institutional money. Today, it's very, very pedestrian amount there. We need a regulation. It is transformational growth. And again, this is low-hanging fruit. So we can continue to say some of these initiatives. If we don't act on them, the transformation will be unbelievable. Nigerians will own houses. We would fix that supply gap because we're so behind right now. The data we saw, Nigeria's housing supply, that's total houses available for sale, is abysmally low. Demand is significantly outweighing supply. And imagine we're still in an economic crisis, getting about to take off because we've seen that most of the problems have been solved. So imagine this government creates 0.5% growth in population in middle class. We'll have a housing crisis. There'll be way more money chasing even a few available houses because a lot of developers have stopped developing because of high interest rates, and it's creating a supply dislocation, and it's going to get worse. Because while on one hand people are praying to get jobs, and after they get jobs they buy a car, they get married, next thing is they're saving to buy a house. We don't even have enough houses. So policy, to a large extent, while they're very good, they're working, but they can be tweaked to achieve much faster results. On innovation, very quickly, we've seen very smart today. I think Wholesome in Kenya is doing affordable housing, and that's where again Professor Jayugana kind of touched on, using new technology to create what we think would work for us and is unique to us. We have clay. We have so many natural resources. How do we then do that backward integration and get the right government policies and support to help ensure that those businesses would stand the test of time? Today, it's very tough going into manufacturing. And while we know that we can solve this problem, not many people are doing it because you will get your hands burned. You really cannot compete in the current world with China. If you start your production today, no matter what the policy is, and China is producing much cheaper, significantly cheaper, one way or the other, it will filter into your country. I won't say it's smuggling. It's not called smuggling, but one way or the other, it gets in. Because that's elementary economics. So China today, even the US is fighting China. You design in the US, you go and produce in China. iPhones, they're all US companies. So even as you look at the prism of production, how do you ensure that you're able to produce in the right manner? Again, we're at advantage today because gradually, 20, 30 years ago, it was globalization. 5 years ago, we started seeing regionalism. So everybody is trying to regionalization. You're trying to bring things within your region. So how do we solve this problem for Africa? We have AFCA. However, the new Donald Trump, the president of the US, is now moving it to nationalism. So how do we take pride? How do we partner with the Chinese who are now looking at the right partners to partner with? And we shouldn't be ashamed of it. They are far ahead of the world. Bring technical partners in. Their government initiatives, they own a part of this and invite private sector because we need that government cover. And one by one, we will fix all of this dislocation. Affordable housing in itself is an aberration. Between the time you do the budget in January and you get it approved and funded, dollar and everything has moved. So even what you planned to deliver as a house can no longer work. Not because the minister did not try or want to solve that problem. Things have just changed. And to fix that, you must manage your supply. Luckily, about 20 years ago, former President Obasanjo started solving this problem by fixing cement. Today, up until 2007, we imported every single thing to build a house. We fixed cement, we're fixing steel. So you can see that between cement and aggregates, we've started fixing it. Roughly 60% is being imported. If from a policy point of view, we line up the remaining 15 or 20 major components and choose 3 or 4 that are the biggest and work from a policy point of view to reduce those ones, you would have significantly solved this housing problem organically. We would not be able to solve all at once, but we can cherry pick the ones we want to solve. On the issue of okay, yes, I've touched on REIT. There are quite a lot of, there's also blended finance. Blended finance is another very laudable initiative. There are diaspora bonds. A lot of investors abroad are looking for the right channel to bring money into Nigeria. This is latent money sitting there. Majority of them want to do real estate. There's just not enough real estate to buy. But there's so much money trying to come in. We also need an avenue to work with government to create this right environment, primarily for real estate. A few of us in our own personal capacity organizations, we're doing it and we're seeing wonderful results. Tremendous growth in investors bringing money, but this can actually now be approached from a national point of view and even an African perspective. So I think my challenge or my primary call here to policymakers is to ensure we create an enabling environment to encourage private sector to participate in funding. To the esteemed private sector shareholders, please invest in the local value chain to create support. To amiable investors and DFIs, you should support our housing initiative with innovative housing models. And like I had mentioned, a coordinated and holistic approach to closing the housing gap is a better and optimal solution that can resolve affordability question we continue to ask, and not multiple fragmented initiatives.